this idea of bricks is an analogy I've been using for years with my students, because they would come in with deep anxiety or depression or frustration. And it was always good for them to step out and say, hey, what are you carrying around into this class? Because they look around this classroom and they think, man, I'm the dumb one here. I'm not as fast here. I'm not the fill in the blank. And I'd say, man, you're trying to compare yourself in a sprint race. If you're just staying even, you're carrying around 100 pounds more than the other guy over there. You're actually faster and stronger than he is. You're just keeping pace, right? And so over time, I learned more and more about this word that's become, I guess, in vogue now, and thank God it is, because we're having some great conversations about this idea of trauma, right? So we think of trauma about being is something like you're in a car wreck, or you go to war, a spouse cheats on you, apparently suddenly dies, and that's true, right? So you have trauma that the nerd word is acute. I call it big T trauma. It's the big ones, right? You are a little kid and you're playing tag, and somebody, you reach out to get somebody, giggling, and then all of a sudden, wham, they hit a wall and break both wrists and start screaming because they're experiencing pain they've never experienced. That's a big T, right? That's big T. I've experienced big T that I'm not going to talk about on a podcast, right? That's mine, right? And then there's a huge moment for me was with my good friend Lynn Jennings, Dr. Lynn Jennings. She's a trauma researcher as well as a child counselor in Texas. And she helped open my eyes to another side of trauma, which is this, what I'm going to call little T trauma, right? It is cumulative trauma that adds up on you over time. And so if you think about bricks being big T trauma, right? You walk home and you find out that your husband of 7 years is cheating on you, and everything that you were anchored to is suddenly severed, or your uncle sexually abuses you, and he's the guy that came over and was your babysitter, and your parents trusted him and nobody listened to you. That's big T trauma. That's a cinder block that goes in your backpack for years, right? But then cumulative trauma is when you come down the stairs every single day and your mom says, oh, honey, that shirt makes you look pudgy, and you want the boys to like you, don't you? You want to be a pretty girl. Pretty girls aren't pudgy. And you go, yeah. And you're 6. Right? And so you go back upstairs to change. That's a little rock that goes in your backpack every time. Every time. Mom didn't hit you. She didn't throw something at you. But she just said, you aren't good enough. And you're going to need to change and cover part of you up so that others will like you. Others will think you're valuable. And those, I call those little rocks. And they go in your backpack. And over time, it's cumulative. Little T trauma adds up over time. And suddenly, those same little rocks add up to the same weight as a cinder block. If you look at a public school teacher who's been teaching for 40 years, sometimes they'll literally walk hunched over a little bit, right? And so one day your counselor pulls you out of class and says, hey, your mom passed away. That's big T trauma, right? Your mom tells you every day, you want to be loved, don't you, right? That's little T, and it adds up and it adds up and it adds up and it adds up. And ultimately the weight in the backpack is the same, right? And so when you hear callers on this show all the time, one of the things I'm always trying to get to as quickly as possible is, what is that person carrying? What are they carrying that's making their journey from A to B harder to get to, right? So here's the deal. At the end of the day, I've started re-examining what I thought about trauma. And it's informed by Peter Levine, who we'll link to these books in the show notes, wrote an extraordinary book called Waking the Tiger. And I think that's the title of the book. Is that the title of the book? I think that is. It's Waking the Tiger. And The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And here's where they really open my eyes and help expand my definition of trauma even further. Is trauma is not the event, that awful moment. And in fact, there's been a lot of studies on memory that will tell me or suggest to me that my memories aren't always so reliable. What is reliable is that my body sounds all the alarms. It remembers. And so trauma, I've stopped defining as what happened, and I've started re-examining my body for, when does my body set off alarms in the present anchored to things in the past? Trauma is anytime your body responds to a past situation as though it's happening in the present, right? So van der Kolk says that trauma is much more than a story about the past that explains why people are frightened or angry out of control. Trauma is re-experienced in the present, not as a story, but as a body reaction, right? So you may experience this when you get around you see some guy and your friend shows up and like, hey, this is Tom. And your body just goes, boo, get out of it, right? Who knows where that trauma's setting off? You may know, right? Or when I see kids running and playing together in a cafeteria, man, my heart starts racing because my brain has been scanning the environment for the last 30 years waiting for that moment and saying, we remember what happens when we do this. Don't do that. And so I have to then go, oh, those are just kids playing. The chances of that happening again are basically zero. They're going to have a good time. What I need to do is address my body. Or like a trauma situation, we would show up to a crisis situation where, let's say someone had been shot, and people's bodies were still responding as though there was an active shooter in that building. What we would do is we would say, hey, we need you to be present now. It was scary then, you're okay now. You're safe now, right? And so the analogy is that trauma is those bricks we carry, and you begin to go through your backpack and look at these bricks and examine them for truth, right? And so over time, of course, your knees hurt and your back hurts and you have stress, headaches. You have all these bodily responses to these things that happened to you in the past. And it could be as benign as, man, you lied and got busted when you were 14 and you took on the identity of, I'm a liar. I'm just a scummy idiot. Or it could have been that you were sexually traumatized as a kid, or you were beat up as a kid, or that coach told you, you can do anything. Or that coach told you, you're such a wimp. You'll always be a wimp, right? And so ultimately, one of the most important things I think for folks to get to is you got to know what bricks are in your backpack. You got to do that hard work of finding out what stories are in there. What stories are you born into? What stories have you told yourself? What stories were told to you? And you got to demand evidence from those stories. You got to look at them and say, is this true? Did I lie when I was 14? Yes, I did. Did I play tag with a girl and push her when she was 9 or 10 and she broke both of her wrists? I'm not going to say that. I broke them. I shoved her and she hit a wall. That happened? Yes. Does that mean that every time kids play, someone's going to get hurt? No. Does that mean I'm a guy that hurts children? No. Right? And so I'm looking at these bricks and demanding evidence. And then the hard work is actually setting them down. Right? So I would want everybody to start, and I'm in the middle of, we're writing a book on this. It's become somewhat of a connection between folks that I never anticipated. That everyone is starting to recognize how much crap they're carrying around, right? And it could be, I thought all Republicans thought this, and I thought all Democrats hated America, and I thought all parents right? We just carry these stories. And I'll also say this, media often has a vested interest in you carrying a lot in your backpack, a lot of identities. You are always going to be nothing more than the worst thing you ever did. You will always be nothing more than the worst thing that's ever happened to you, because the more they can keep your alarm spinning, the more they can sell you a solution. They can offer you a result, and they can offer you something to make it go away, whether it's you just need some you time or a new class or a new program or a new type of therapy, whatever. And what I want to tell you is there's another way. And the other way is getting with people that you care about or that you trust, often with a professional counselor, depending on the level of trauma that you experienced, the big T trauma and even little T trauma as a kid or as an adult, and taking those bricks out of your backpack and just setting them down. Those backpacks get really, really heavy.